And we're looking forward to hearing about pollinators.
Thank you, Sherry. Natalie's just setting up the first slides.
Everybody can see that?
Yes, we can, Natalie. That's great.
Okay. So really the purpose for my giving this talk was I really wanted to encourage others to experience nature, go out and explore by yourself and see all the different aspects and dimensions of nature, and really try and feel the wonder and the greatness and the joy and so on in doing that. Now, the talk is on pollinators, but I thought because this is a spiritual environmental cafe, I sort of put in some other remarks at the beginning. And so the topic of pollination is one door into understanding meaning and purpose in life and relationships between all things. My explorations are kind of at the middle of science, religion, arts, culture, and technology, kind of a blend of the whole thing. These are all major approaches to our understanding life. For me, I don't really see divides between them. I just see them as different perspectives looking at the same thing. We live in a very complex, highly ordered and dynamic world. It's really one system within which there are many processes, sub-processes, mechanisms, continually operating in a very delicate balance. This unique system of oneness created by God also maintains what seems like a contrary thing, diversity. And it maintains a steady adaptation of everything through time, through the process of evolution. All things are intimately connected, directly and indirectly, whether we as humans like that or not, and in an intricate pattern of interrelationships and interdependencies. While to some degree the world is very contained, it's really an open system. Physically, it's affected by very dominantly by the sun and the moon, and to a little bit by the wider universe. But spiritually, it's always influenced by the creator. And nature, which is a creation itself, is the world's operating system. It has two aspects, one material and one spiritual, which are intimately intertwined. All processes and relationships operating in the world have both a physical and a spiritual aspect to them. This is because all living beings, plants, animals, and humans, have both a body and a spirit. The spirit's what animates them and gives them life and purpose and meaning. Without spirit, life wouldn't exist, so the world would be really non-existent. Each form of life is defined by physical and spiritual properties, qualities, powers, capacities, but also limitations. All living beings have limitations of different sorts. And each individual living being is unique, which is a very important aspect of nature. No two things are completely identical. They may fall into kind of a group together, but none are actually completely identical if you look closely. Some spiritual qualities that are expressed in nature through physical means include just being alive, beauty, fragrance, awe, wonder, power, might, majesty, patience, tranquility, and especially sacrifice. We'll get to sacrifice later because everything eats something else. And so there are sacrifices of our lives for one another across all the different creatures. Within certain animals, we see curiosity, some creativity. They organize their collective community lives. They persevere. Many have strong work ethic, and they have some sort of communications. Humans have a couple of hundred other spiritual qualities and capacities beyond animals, including love, unity, justice, trust, truth, trustworthiness, kindliness, compassion, mercy, forgiveness. But all of these are potential powers, and unless we actually gain enough knowledge and have the will to use them, they may not get used. And in that case, we end up with problems. Every act within this world, whether positive or negative, affects to some degree everything else and causes a reactive response. Disrupting or breaking any part of these relationships can have very serious consequences and this will cause imbalances in the world. And nature always works to re-establish balance. And it can do so in different ways. Some could be very gentle, and some could be catastrophic if that's what's needed. So how did I get to doing a thing on pollinators? I never formally studied biology, botany, animal sciences, or anything in that area of study. But I spent a lot of time gardening, and I've spent a lot of time in nature, in the fields and in the forests. And then for years, I started doing photographing especially different stages in the developments of gardens, most of which were gardens that Natalie here and I planted, as well as the neighborhood gardens and parks. And this has greatly helped me in becoming attuned to the nature around me, how I see it, how I would treat it, how I can contribute to it. In the last 3 years, I realized I had a pollinator garden. So then I thought, I better start photographing the pollinators. So another detail of the whole picture. And I had already been photographing the flowers. So this just made me even more aware and made me wish that I needed to share this learning, whatever I've learned in this regard, with others. I'm not doing so from a very high level educative approach. It's more from the personal approach. So starting with pollination, what is pollination? As I dig deeper into my understanding of it, I see it as both simple, very simple in some regards, but extremely complex in others, depending on what level you look at. I started with the following. Plant pollination is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male part, the anther of one flower, to the female part, the stigma of the same flower or another flower. Other flowers, yes, Natalie, if you could show that. We'll come back to that. This is a simple picture, which if you look at a tulip, you kind of see this kind of picture. But if you look at a lot of other flowers, it looks quite a bit different. So I'll start again with plant pollination is the act of transferring pollen grains from the male part, the anther of one flower, to the female part, the stigma, that's the central part, of the same flower or another flower. The other flower may be on the same plant or another plant of the same species. Now it starts to get, there's things that make it more complex. Some flowers are only male or female. That really requires a helper to transfer the pollen from one flower to another. Germination begins as the pollen moves through tubes to fertilize the eggs in the ovary, thus creating seeds. And the spreading of seeds is another aspect, which I did want to talk about, but there's not enough time. But animals help a lot in that too. It completes the reproductive process by planting so that the new plants grow. So I'm going to look for a minute at reproduction, evolution, and more complexities. It's the goal of every living physical organism, including plants, to create offspring for the next generation. Pollination is the process of regeneration for most of the flowering plants. So that's probably tens of thousands of different plants. All bodies die when the spirit leaves them. Plants and animals are more physically focused because at their death, their spirit disappears. It's different for humans. At death, the human spirit separates from the body, and the spirit and soul live in the invisible spiritual realms beyond this life. But we still have the physical regeneration of human offspring in this life. At the same time, each generation both recreates the past generation and advances it genetically in some new ways. One of the ways that plants can produce offspring is by making seeds. And each seed contains genetic information. This is what's needed to define what the next generation will appear like and how it will advance the species. Evolution is a process by which all things steadily transform and advance together. I'm going off of the view of evolution as the Darwinian one, probably quite a bit as I go through here. All are part of an ever-advancing world process. Living beings either continually adapt or they disappear. To survive means appropriate coevolution. For pollination to happen, plants need the help of either a different physical force, the wind and water, or activities of living agents, that's animals of different sorts or humans. Insects naturally provide the majority of effective pollination. This is a win-win situation for the plants and the insects. They feed on the plants so that they can survive and themselves reproduce, and they in turn help plants to reproduce. Pollination is thus a reciprocal symbiotic relationship, an interdependency, and plants and insects co-evolve together, not independently, in a very delicate, balanced relationship. Now, pollinators don't eat all the plant. They just draw nectar from it and some of the pollen that they use for food, or they nibble on some of the leaves, but the plant continues to grow. And the nectar and pollen do not just feed the insect that comes to visit the plant, but it takes it back to the entire community of insects. Like as we well know, the female worker bees bring food back to the whole hive community together. So all these things are connected. There is a food chain in which all living beings eat other living beings, and all are food sources of others, with no exception. Predators of insect pollinators, namely other insects, frogs, birds, bats, feed off the pollinators, but each eats only what they need. This is the natural balance. For them, there's no good or bad in this. It's just the way of life. There are also different pollination styles. Some plants only pollinate by wind and water, especially trees and grasses. And this is a very haphazard approach. They basically scatter loads of pollen, and much of it is waste, but enough of it reaches the targets that are intended. Some plants self-pollinate in that they've designed themselves to allow the anther to actually brush against the stigma and so directly transfer the pollen. But this type of pollination doesn't really permit genetic mixing, and so it's quite limited. So most plants cross-pollinate, but to cross-pollinate, it's more problematic, where the pollen has to come from the anther of one flower and be transferred to the stigma of another flower on another plant, or another flower on the same plant, or a flower on another plant of the same species. And this permits genetic mixing and provides better adaptation to changing climate disease, and other local stresses and conditions that are placed on the plant. And then in cross-pollination, it relies on an agent of some sort. I've heard it referred to as a vector, but pollinator makes much more direct sense to me, to carry out the transfer. They are far more effective than wind and water. Bees are very purposeful, very efficient, very effective pollinators. They have a good accuracy, and they have hairy bodies where they can easily collect all of the pollen. You'll see some pictures of that later. And in quite large amounts, and they have sacs for storing the nectar. Beetles, wasps, flies, and some other insects are also very important pollinators. Now, butterflies, who are the poster face of pollination, just because of their great beauty, they're far less efficient, but they do pollinate. Ants are the kind of inefficient pollinators where it's more accidental than purposeful. But they do help in other ways. For example, you'll see them grooming peonies. Moths take the late shift, doing pollinating in the late afternoon and evening. And pollinators are responsible for assisting over 80% of the world's flowering plants to reproduce. So without them, humans and wildlife wouldn't have much to eat, to look at, or as habitat. Moving on to another section. I call it, it's a jungle out there. This has to do with the communication, foraging, competition, and cooperation. Plants and insects communicate with one another. They do so through visual cues, color, patterns, the shape of petals, the molding of the flowers. Many flowers also release scents, pheromones, and sometimes hormones, and these attract certain insects. They repulse others, or just don't make themselves attractive to others. Size and shape and depth of the flower can make differences because it makes it impossible for some insects to pollinate, but works really, really well for others. Patterns and colors are also used by the insects as a means to scare off predators and identify friends. But some predators fool their prey by using disguises to make themselves look like friends. Insects and other animals use pheromones too to attract others of the same species to mate. But in terms of pollination, they use it to lay trails for foraging, to direct others in their communities, and or to repel enemies and competitors. Bees have also adapted, as you probably know, a way of dancing that shows which way to go to find the best forage sites. There are some insects that are kind of cheaters and are dangerous in some ways. I saw a bee last summer, and I've heard about them. They can clip the wings of other bees, and that kills them. And there's some insects that will suck through the side of the flower, so they don't end up taking any pollen. And so it works against pollination. Could you show the next chart now? Well, these are just some of the themes I've been covering. And then there are floral characteristics, traits, and strategies that are referred to as pollination syndromes. And you can find various lists of these, so you can relate different insects to different plants. And but these will change with location. If you show the next slide. Each different place has its own
It looks like Stephen's frozen for a moment,
I
but
think he's frozen, yeah.
I'm pretty sure he'll be back. So let's just check out the slide here and give him a few minutes.
We should probably tell Stephen that we can't hear him. Even if he can't hear us, we should give it a try. Where is he gone? I think he's left. He's gone out to. He'll come back.
Yeah,
When you freeze like that, sometimes the simplest thing to do is to exit and re-enter. So I don't think he's quit. I think he's just going out to come back in.
I think you're right, Brian.
Yeah.
It's very interesting information, isn't it?
A nice poster of all the possible pollinators.
I could throw in a couple things. I learned about butterflies a couple of years ago. I mean, I didn't know a lot of things, but they're really amazing. Well, what I did learn was they can see ultraviolet, and let me see, they taste with their feet, and I think they hear with their wings. So can you imagine how different they are from us, and the world they live in? They could care less about humans. So, it must be so nice.
The Tulip Festival had little boxes set up over some of the tulips along Dow's Lake that were supposed to show how bees saw, how they found the tulips with the ultraviolet light. Did anybody go and look at that display along there? And I guess there is like the butterflies, and that's the way they can sort of see where they're aiming for pollen and nectar. I wonder if you're getting a note. Did you get a note, Sherry, from Stephen?
Yeah, no, I haven't seen anything yet.
Aaron, you may want to pause the recording. I don't know if you want to keep recording this.
So
Sorry about that. We were somehow cut off.
glad to have you back.
Start from the beginning.
I'm just near the end.
We'll go back a bit because we missed you for a couple of minutes.
Okay,
That picture was nice. That's where we left off. Would get nice to get a copy of that if possible.
Which one?
Yeah,
the chart.
showing the different plants
Yes.
in Ontario.
Yeah,
I can
that was a
send
nice drawing.
that could be sent around. I was just starting to say, I think when I was cut off, the monarch butterflies will taste the sap from the milkweed flowers, but it's very poisonous to most other insects. Natalie's just trying to show
I'm going to
the.
do the third. Right, you go ahead, continue.
Okay. Anyways, going back, I was going to say many pollinators only go to one or two specific types of flowers, but bees are generalists and they go to almost everything. They really a wide range of flowers. If you look at, there's some pictures coming up, and if you look at those, you may see the proboscises, the sort of mouthpiece, tongue parts of the insects. It affects how well they can pollinate and how well they can feed on the plants. Especially for like butterflies, they can't really get in too far into plants, and so it limits what they can pollinate.
Do you see that?
Yes, we do.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a bumblebee on a hibiscus flower. We have hundreds of hibiscus flowers in our backyard. And you can see a lot of pollen all over it. So just don't go too far. Timing is everything. Okay, you can go maybe one. Timing is everything in pollination. There are certain time periods when flowers will release pheromones to signal that the pollen in the anther is ready to be moved and the stigmas are ready to receive it. You might see flowers and there's no bees or other insects going to them, 1 week, and then the next week they're all over those flowers. It's the timing of the release of the pheromones and things like that cause that to happen. And then the pollinators immediately respond to this timing. And but stigmas will reject pollen from other species of plants, so they won't just take anything. Now, where things become problematic is if one particular species of pollinators starts to disappear, so will a particular species of plant that it relies on. And then there's a chain reaction down all the predators of the pollinators and so on, and the communities of those pollinators. And so when destruction comes over many species of plants and animals, the entire food chain breaks down and the reproductive chain breaks down. And so this could be very badly affect all the plants, animals, and humans. Pollinators contribute directly to the growth of about 1/3 of the food we eat. Here's a picture of, it's very hard to get photographs of insects in flight. And that takes a lot of patience and extra shots. But this one, you can see all the pollen. She is totally covered in pollen as she's going into a new hibiscus flower here. Now in nature, only humans have the ability to step outside a little bit and to manipulate to a certain extent, nature's laws and rules. And this is where humans can both cause improvements to the environment or environmental disasters. And nature will come back to bite us if we abuse it. So humans are both the problem and the solution to environmental disasters. Pollinators are essential to human survival, but are increasingly under threat from habitat loss and death due to urbanization, industrial agriculture, global warming, use of pesticides, and other things. In our self-centeredness, our arrogance, greed, unawareness, wastefulness, laziness, and the wish to dominate nature, we have greatly abused many aspects of it. However, we are capable of behaving differently. If we see that all life is sacred and important, we can work to protect pollinators by decreasing activity that negatively impacts them and ensuring the creation of adequate spaces for them in our cities and countryside. That's where I'm stopping. And I had asked if Aaron would put in the chat a what can we do list that I made up, compiled from some things I read and some things I added myself.
Which you could send to them.
Yeah, which can be sent around too, but if you would put it in the chat. This is a picture of a sunflower. Almost all these pictures are from our gardens over the past 2-3 years. And if they're not, they're from the neighborhood around. Now it's interesting, bees usually go to one at a time to a flower. And you see if two try and go to the same flower, one will bump the other one away. But with sunflowers, they gather as if they're a team. And you'll see 4 or 5 or 6, maybe even 8 on a sunflower, all working away.
Because they're so big. See there.
Yeah. And here's a hosta plant. He's just landed. This one's just landing too in the hosta. It goes right inside. These are obedience. This is an obedience plant, and you'll see bees love those. You'll usually see multiple bees, one in each of the flowers. Here's one of our cute little. These are little butterflies, and they come in pairs. We often have two pairs of them come, and they dance around in the back in the yard in the air, and then they'll fly off, and then they'll come back, and and then they'll visit the plants. Flies are much better pollinators than we probably give credit to, since we get a little annoyed with them. Here's another sunflower bee. You can see the proboscis a bit just at the front of the bee. There's a wasp on a mint plant. They like mints, they like mint, and they like raspberry really a lot. Here's a sweat bee, a green bee, and they're neon green color. And we're getting close to the end. This is a Japanese beetle, not always a desirable one, but it's helping pollinate here. There's another wasp. Now there's lots of wasps and bees in the garden, but it's safe to walk through the garden. They're busy. They're not bothering you. You're not bothering them, and so they just keep at their work. Now this is the last picture, and it's interesting because the two bees at the top are actively feeding in the flowers there. The one on the bottom is asleep. It slept there for like a few hours and then eventually flew off. And quite often I see bees that are taking a nap. Oh no, there's one more. They're taking a nap. Here's a ladybug, type of ladybug. So there are actually thousands of different kinds of insects, and each of those have multiple species, and there are tens of thousands of different flowers. So that makes for all kinds of combinations of things to happen. So it's a very, very complex web of relationships. And as I said, that whole area is kind of advancing at once, evolving at once, changing. And they're not doing so separately from one another, because they have to do it in context of one another. And I'm going to wrap up there.
Any questions?
Well, Stephen, thank you very much. I sure learned a lot from your talk. It was just fascinating, and your photos were beautiful. You know, it was really great to see the interconnectedness of all living things, including ourselves, and the diversity of nature that we have. So I want to thank you, and now we have opportunity to share and discuss among ourselves anything about pollination. Questions for Stephen. I do have one like conversation starter that I'll throw out there, but you're welcome to share any thoughts. And it's this: we're encouraged in religious writings to be responsible for animals, to show forth the utmost loving kindness to every living creature. So what does it look like to be tender and loving and show consideration to pollinators?
Okay. Well, I go out in the garden now every day, and I have breakfast out there actually, and kind of visit, see what's going on, see what's new plants have how each plant is growing, what what flowers have opened and what ones have died away, and what insects there are in the garden. And like right now, in the spring, in the early part of spring, you don't see too much in the way of the pollinators, but then they start all of a sudden appearing. I took a picture of one early flower, and I didn't realize there were any pollinators out yet. And there was a pollinator hidden inside that flower, some kind of bee. It wasn't a bumblebee. I'm not sure exactly what it was. And it was hidden in there, and I saw it in the photograph. And that was my first pollinator photograph of the season. But I go and be out there. And I had my grandchildren here last summer, and I made sure they went out in the garden and right in the middle with bees all around them, and you know, all kinds of, there's wasps out there too, and we're perfectly fine. We just
I got
have
a question.
Yeah, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Oh, I have a question. I know all of that talk was about flowers, and vegetables, I guess they all have their own flowers, so it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excuse my ignorance, but I'm just learning about gardening and having a rough time with vegetables. Don't like me very much.
Now you may notice that if you look carefully, you see more flowers than you think are there. Like you don't think of certain, especially vegetables, having flowers necessarily, but if you're watching, you see them. And some flowers are very, very small, especially on trees, very tiny. But there are also extremely tiny insects as well. I've seen almost microscopic bees in the garden. I can't take pictures of them, they're too small, but they're out there.
Bill, you have your hand up, and then Heather.
Yes, that's like really amazing photography. Hard to believe that someone would call themselves an amateurs doing that kind of thing. But I was just wondering, you know, like the photography is kind of focused pretty close in on things. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the big picture of pollination and what the consequences of losing our pollinators is, and what's happening now in terms of deterioration of the pollinating system, those kinds of things.
Yeah, well, I guess one of the biggest ways it's hit recently is in Quebec and Ontario. There's been a big drop in the number of honeybees for a few different reasons, and but humans contribute a lot of damage to the insect and wild animal populations by, you know, stripping areas of trees and plants and putting up houses and putting up factories and putting up whatever, just paving it over. And so we need a bit more care in that. We need to make spaces in which pollinators can still exist, and other animals and things can still exist. We don't have to tear everything apart. And we can also create certain, some people, like we had a fair recently, and there was one group had built starter bee kits, homes. Not all bees live in big communities, some in just smaller groups. And so you could use one of these bee houses to attract bees in your, you know, near your home or in your garden.
Can I say something? I think the other issue is when pollinators decrease in size, it affects all produce, and even for those who are still eating meat, it affects the grass and the things that the animals eat, and so the whole food chain is affected by a diminished number of pollinators. So it has very adverse effects on the whole food chain.
Things like monoculture gardening, what that means is maybe only one of the pollinators can exist there. The others have nothing to feed on. things like that. There's a lot of
Interconnect.
yeah, there's so much interconnection and so much each species has its own whole set of what it can and can't do. And then if you kill the pollinator, you also basically start to get rid of the predators of the pollinator, and that and it spins down the line the predators of those predators and so on, and goes down the line. Any other thoughts or questions or experience?
Yeah, Heather, please go ahead. Take yourself off mute.
There was two issues. Is that I'm amazed at how many insects or pollinators. Like I thought of bees and wasps and maybe ants because of the peonies, but I didn't realize there was such an incredible diversity. And people think of many insects as pests. And so people will maybe protect butterflies and bees and wasps, but don't think of the other insects that are also pollinating. Because I certainly didn't think of it that way anyway, or maybe that's just me. And the other thing is I have a garden on my balcony. I now have about 8 pots, and I have vegetables and some flowers. I was wondering, is there ways to attract pollinators to an apartment balcony?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. I guess I've sort of learned by trial and error. I just put, well, as I said, bees come to most flowers, but
Wildflowers,
not just wildflowers. They come to all kinds of
but they
flowers.
love wild.
I just lost my train of thought, but you have to try some different things. I know that like in our garden, hibiscus, roses, asters, hostas,
Milkweed.
and milkweed, echinacea, all of the cone flowers.
Cosmos.
Yeah, and cosmos, and there's a lot of the annual flowers that they'll go for.
I think if you plant them, they will come.
Yeah, yeah, and you have to watch for them to see them as you come. It's amazing because there's talk of some people have actually set some up at rooftop bee gardens. And so bees will travel a long way to find plants, and apparently will go to certain heights to do so too.
Stephen,
Yeah.
you didn't mention mosquitoes, but do they, because they are a pest as far as I'm concerned, but would they be part of the group or not? They just going for blood and that's it.
Probably not. And that's one, as I said, every creature gets fed on, and humans get fed on by mosquitoes and black flies.
The other one I was going to ask was the hummingbird, because
Yeah.
aren't they really good? Are they the only bird that really does it?
They're the only main bird that does it in North America. But I think a lot of the other birds, when they mess around in a tree or they, just they're always scuttering around in the backyard. And I'm sure it's causing some pollination. Yes. And Charlie, you had something?
Yeah, I was wondering, I'm sort of just starting my own garden for the first time. What would you say are some of the easiest pollinator plants to do? Like if you were just starting out and you don't have a very green thumb, what would be your recommendations?
Echinacea.
Echinacea, yeah.
Echinacea.
Echinacea will definitely draw in the bees.
And
That's
it's
Milkweed,
and it's
milkweed
beautiful.
is,
milkweed,
Milkweed, I didn't,
not so
I
much.
haven't seen so many insects go to it because it's actually poisonous to a lot of,
it's for butterflies more, yeah.
yeah, it's for butterflies. And
And it's
I was
poison.
surprised though, like I put in radishes. I never got much in the way of actual radishes to eat, but the little butterflies loved coming to the radish plants.
Mm.
So it's a lot of trial and error. That's why I said at the beginning to really experience for yourself, you know, get a couple of things and try it and see if it works.
The asters are fabulous.
Asters
too.
in the fall. Now there are plants that I've planted, and then there are plants that just blow into the garden or are transferred by squirrels or something.
Mhm.
Or birds. And asters, all the asters I have, there's 3 big bunches now. None of them did I plant. And the bees and some of the other insects just swarm them in the fall, like just swarms. It's the bush is shaking because there's so many there. Sherry, you had something?
Yeah, well, I want to put in a plug for dandelions.
Yes, oh yes, dandelions are nice.
Yeah, because if you see the dandelions blooming and you look closely, you will see little bees in those bright yellow blossoms. And dandelions are one of the first plants that flower in the spring. So you can imagine when the pollinators are coming back from wherever they go in the winter, and they're really, really hungry. They need those dandelions, and that's why I think you have some initiatives going on like No Mow May. So don't, just start mowing your lawn early in May, wait, so that you have those little flowers that are probably growing in your grass because, well, first of all, you don't want to poison your lawn, right? To get rid of your dandelions and creeping Charlie and whatever else is growing there. But you want to have those available for the pollinators to come. And then the other comment I wanted to make was about birds. So in addition to hummingbirds being pollinators because of sipping the nectar and those often tubular flowers, birds do a lot of seed dispersal from eating the fruits of trees and plants, bushes, and maybe nuts. And I guess I'm wondering, would you call that part of the pollination process or just plant regeneration? Is it something different since they're not actually doing like the transfer of pollen from, anther to stigma?
Yeah, it's kind of the next stage. And it's the squirrels are interesting because especially for oak trees, I heard that the squirrels will move acorns and plant them actually in certain spots which are away far enough that the trees aren't like conflicting with one another. They know exactly how far to put them. Natalie, I think had
I
something.
do. In terms of a new garden, I think also wild roses are a
Yes.
wonderful and very easy. We started our wild rose bush, which is enormous now and very, very full of lovely, fragrant flowers from a twig, a cutting. And you just wouldn't believe the size and what it attracts besides your own pleasure. The other thing is, I don't know what people feel, but we don't have any grass. It's all flowers, mainly perennials, but not a blade of grass. So, or
Well,
if it's,
few,
or a
couple.
few ornamental, a little bit of ornamental, Japanese grass. So we stay away from grass because who wants to mow? I don't.
Hey, thank you, Natalie. Carol.
I just wanted to add to what you said there, Sherry, about, like dispersal. I know that there's like, and not mowing at the beginning of May. Also in the fall, I know that the Wild Pollinators, the organization, they suggest that you don't even kind of gather up your leaves. That they're on your lawn, leave them there. They're on your driveway, leave them there, because they get to be a source of shelter for many an insect, many a pollinator, and they act as, of course, like a source of fertilizer in their decomposition. But while it's there in the fall, it helps promote the growth and the sheltering of these pollinators. So I thought there's something that we should be doing as a practice, just to protect and grow our pollinators.
Carol, that's a really good point, and I'll add to that. I read an article that said don't do cleanup in the fall, and part of the reason was that you leave those things, decaying in your garden, and then in the springtime when the birds come, they're picking through that and collecting all those like dead grasses and leftovers from the flowers to build their nests with.
Mm.
Leslie.
Yeah, I was going to mention there's a really interesting novel written called The History of Bees, which has 3 different time periods. One of them is the future, when there are no bees, and centered on characters, fictional characters in Asia, that their job is to go and paint, with brushes to pollinate the fruit trees, because there are no fruit trees that are getting pollinated with natural pollinators. And then another time period is sort of about now, when, and this, I know this happens now, where bee hives are transported from farm to pollinate blueberries, and they'll travel across the United States from Texas to a northern state in order to set in a field for 3 weeks or whatever to do the pollination, and then they're transported somewhere else in order to keep things producing in a monoculture kind of situation, right? And then the other time period is when when the stacked box pollinators were invented. The man who invented that way of setting up beehives, rack by rack, so that you can take the honey off it and keep different numbers of boxes over the winter, reduce the size once you've taken the honey off, stuff like that. It's quite an interesting book. I think it's translated from Swedish, and the last name is Lund. Pretty scary.
Thank you, Leslie.
All right.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I don't know if everyone here on the Zoom meeting is knowledgeable of Abdu'l-Baha, excuse me, and his talks on the different kingdoms. And you did do a segue on that. It was really well done. I'm looking forward to listening to your presentation again, because it was so rich, and yeah, it really resonated with everything that I'm sort of trying to learn through the indigenous people here. The way of looking at nature, they don't even call it nature, they call it all my relations. And they really see the interconnectedness of everything and the reciprocity, between all the creatures on Mother Earth. So that was fantastic. I had a question that was sort of the reason why I came to this meeting. And by the way, I'm in BC. And on a sad note, I've learned from my Indigenous friends that who do guided tours here in BC, that, and everybody can read that also, but I don't read much the newspaper, that there is a plan to do deforestation. So to allow the trees to grow faster, to kill all the canopy underneath the trees, to sort of remove the insects also, but that also means removing the bees. So that is so sad. When I learned that, I'm like, oh, some people don't understand, you know, they really, I think the indigenous people have to step in and we have to become accomplices of them to allow them to educate all people, especially the decision makers, to understand that this is really wrong. It's killing us and all the future generations. Nature is going, you know, the earth and all the creatures, most of the creatures will survive. It's human beings that won't be able to thrive anymore. But my question was, and it's a really banal question, can a flower, does it, the pollen that it releases, is it fixed? Is this like a certain amount, or does it create more pollen? Or depending, I guess, on the flower, on the plant. So because I see the bees going from one flower to the next, but I'm not there, you know, filming them on the same plant to see if they come back or not. But it was like a curiosity, would a flower give out pollen for the amount of time you mentioned, you know, that there's a critical period where the stigma can be, how do you call that? In French, we say fécondé, where the ovules can be fertilized. There we go. So that was my question. Can a flower release pollen even though, you know, the bees came and fed themselves and took some pollen away?
They must be creating more because I see the same flower will have several insects come to it, especially bees. Even the same, you know, maybe the same bee might go to another flower and then come back to that one. And there's a lot of activity in it, and yeah, so there has to be either there's a lot there to begin with and not all of it's being taken at once, or else there's more being generated. Yeah.
It's fascinating. I work in a daycare here in Gibsons, BC, and just yesterday we have we're so privileged. There's a woman, an auntie. I heard recently a native man who would be called an elder. He says, I want to be called uncle. And I like that because everybody's on the same sort of plane. I can be an auntie, you can be an uncle, and doesn't depend on the age. But he was so beautiful in the way he presented, you know, what you just said about being connected with each other. But this woman who is an auntie, she's been gardening for, I think, 10 years plus, and there's so much plants there and flowering plants, and of course all the plants that were planted there are all edible, so no kid can become poisoned by eating a leaf or even a flower. But they were looking at the comfrey flower, and they were just fascinated. And I had to tell them, don't get so close, don't distract the bees, you know, let them work. They're working really hard. But it's beautiful to have that type of education, and that's what I also find fascinating, that you've been self-educating. You know, you're not a specialist, but because of your observation, you can share all these things with us, and you've done a bit of research. But thank you so much for what you brought today.
You're welcome. I wanted to mention about the cutting of trees. BC has a particular problem because of the forestry industry of overcutting and clear cutting huge areas. I used to work in remote sensing, where I used interpreted satellite pictures of the Earth and for mapping purposes. And there were a team of us, and we would sometimes go out to different places. I went to BC one time, in northern BC, to map certain things, but you really notice the clear cutting, and it's on slopes which can then collapse, and the earth goes away, and then there's not much to grow on, and so you don't have a fast return of trees, and there's many problems with that. But some of the foresters in Ontario and Quebec, I know, where they started using different patterns of cutting, so that they didn't completely clear cut everything, and they wouldn't cut up right to, say, the side of a lake, or a river, because they didn't want all the earth to be flowing into the lake and killing the lake and things like that. So there have been advances made, but gradually you see the tree cutting is going further and further north. And you know, how long can that go on? Are there others who haven't asked any questions who might have, or have a comment to make of some sort? No? Okay, I guess we're kind of coming to a, oh, Sherry has a hand up there. You're on mute, Sherry.
Thank you. Leslie, I think you had mentioned that you had some information about pollinator plant sale. Is that something you might want to mention and put in the chat? It sounds like Charlie might have a good source for
Yes.
some plants for her garden.
Yeah, I can, I'll see if I can put it in the chat. There was a sale in the Great Leaf Garage sale, and there were a number left over, and it's a fundraiser for the community associations groups of environmental committees. So cafes is what it's called, but they sold quite a few on that day, but they have a number left over, and they have a chart with a picture of which pollinators they are. So there is some echinacea, some of the aster, which sounds like it's a really good choice, cone flower, tall purple.
Cone flowers.
Mhm. Anyway, I'll see if I can cut and paste here for you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I
don't
just
know
have
if
one
you
extra
know.
comment. It would be really beautiful if you could give your presentation at a level for young ones and go in schools and do that presentation. That would be fabulous.
Actually, I used to do some children's classes, and I had made up I every once in a while work on it. I had made up a sort of study of the different kingdoms, the mineral, vegetable, animal, and human kingdoms, and what are the properties of each ones, and how they differ, and how they actually share so much together, and so on. And it was from a children's perspective, because it starts saying, I am a mineral because I share all the same things that minerals have. And then go to explain why. And then the same thing, I am also a plant because I share all these things that the plant has, and so on. And it, yeah, I had used some of that with kids, and yeah, it's great.
Might I suggest something for the conference that's coming up? Maybe put the registration link. It's free of charge, but people do have to pre-register. It's much better, so they know how many people are going to come. If you could put the link of the registration in the chat, might be helpful.
Natalie, thank you for that suggestion. Erin, would you do that, please? Great. Well, friends, we're just about 9 o'clock now, so I think it's probably time to close. I want to remind everyone that the next Environmental Cafe 613 will be on Tuesday, June 28th at 7:30, with the topic being environmental justice. And we will be sending out flyers to those of you that have asked for email notifications. And then I want to close by thanking our musician, Cy, for his wonderful songs this evening.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, Stephen, for your wonderful presentation. Very fascinating and really timely with the spring and summer upon us. Thanks to Erin for all the technology hosting, and also to Natalie for the photos sharing for the presentation. And thank you to everyone for attending and participating. We look forward to seeing you again soon. And stay well and happy gardening.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherry. That was great.
Good night. Thank
Thanks a
you.
lot.
Okay, good night,
Thank you very
everyone.
much. Good night.
Good
Good
night,
night.
Ms. Hall.
Thank
Very
you.
nice
Good night,
presentation.
everybody.
Bye-bye.